Howdy Hammer fans, so the other night I watched Nightmare, but did it turn out to be a nightmare to sit through, or was it more like a pleasant dream that just happened to be called Nightmare? Before we get into it, I'll quickly say that you'll find all my other Hammer reviews in my Hammer playlist, and there will be spoilers today. This is a very old movie, 58 years old, as the crow flies. So this is a story about a young woman called Janet. She's about 17. She's at a boarding school, but she's suffering from nightmares and she's constantly waking the other girls up because she wakes up in a cold sweat and she's calling out with good reason, because back when she was 11, she witnessed her father being brutally stabbed to death by her mother, who is now in an insane asylum. But Janet has got way too much baggage to be concentrating on her schoolwork, so she arranges to go back to the stately manor owned by her guardian. So she's taken a break from school for a while, but things don't pick up for her when she's back there, because at night time she starts to see this weird ghostly figure moving around outside her room. But is this some kind of supernatural presence, or is somebody playing tricks on her? We will find out. So the plot bears more than a striking resemblance, I think, to an earlier Hammer film called Taste of Fear. In that film, Susan Strasbourg's character was moving around this large house and she kept finding a dead body in various different places. And the question was, is this skeleton corpse moving around, or is somebody moving the corpse just to trick this girl? No surprise to me at all that both films are written by Jimmy Sangster. I normally really like his work, but there are a number of kind of logic issues in this particular film. I just kind of wondered at several points, especially during the first half of this, could Janet have not just run out to the corridor and checked whether this mysterious figure is a human or a ghost? The weird thing is, this film starts really well. The very first scene in the film is an actual nightmare, which is very apt given the title of it. We get to see Janet actually in the same asylum where her mother's been sent to, and her mother seems to be calling out all over the place, and then Janet ends up in the same cell as her mother, trapped. It's a very effective opening scene, even though it's not real. And then we get some nice establishing shots where we get to see Janet go from the boarding house to back home in Maidenhead, and along the way she has to pass the actual asylum that she's been having nightmares about earlier, which is very good for the story at this point. Plus it leads to a really gorgeous shot where this car goes past this asylum and then turns left, so we can then see back projection of the asylum through the back window. It's really nicely done. It's the first of two really great shots that I noticed in this film, because later on, the Grace character, she walks across a room and you get this gorgeous top-down shot where you just see Grace pacing from right to left. Given how that it's such a simple scene, I'm quite impressed that director Freddie Francis took the time to do something as innovative as that. This film looks really good, and I say that despite the fact that the Blu-ray that I watched it on has got quite a lot of blemishes and spots and stuff. I get so used to Blu-rays now giving you perfect presentations, even when it comes to older films, that when I see some of the little scratches and stuff that I got with this film, I'm almost like taken aback a little bit. But it's mainly in the early stages that you have to sit through that stuff with Nightmare. Once I got past the first 10 minutes, I didn't really notice too much. But even though the film looks really good from start to finish, like I said earlier, there are major problems with logic, and we'll get into some more of those. This is definitely a film of two halves. So in the first half, we follow Janet as she's terrorised by a tag team of the Grace character and Henry, who is Janet's guardian. And then in the second half, we switch viewpoints to that of Grace and Henry as the tables are flipped and they themselves are terrorised, this time by a strange coalition of butlers, maids and college lecturers. But the first half of the film is definitely the best because we're following things from Janet's point of view. She's the only likeable character in the film, really. She's naive, but I still found myself rooting for her. You know, I wanted her to get her life back on track. I wanted her to win the day. Once the film starts focusing on Grace and Henry, I just lose interest by that point. I mean, I'm open to the idea of a film switching to the point of view of the villains halfway through, but if you're going to do that, you'd better make sure that those villains have the pulling power, personality-wise, of like Heath Ledger's the Joker. Because if not, I'm just going to find myself wanting to go back to the protagonist. And being honest, Grace and Henry are just vile people, absolute dullards. I just did not want to follow this film from their point of view. But also, I think by the time you get to the second half, the effect of the scares is definitely lessened because we know by then that there's nothing supernatural going on. But you know what? Both halves of the film suffer from a complete lack of logic, even the first half. So earlier I touched upon this idea that Janet would have definitely run out of her room and checked on whether the wandering person was a human or not very, very early on. I also found myself wondering, what the hell did Grace and Henry hope to get out of this scheme? Because they couldn't have known that Janet was going to kill Henry's wife. I mean, that's 1,000 to 1 shot. Grace and Henry would just not have known that was going to happen. So at best, they could have hoped maybe to make Janet go crazy enough to need committing to an asylum. But if Janet had gone to an asylum without killing somebody, it wouldn't have been a very long stay. She would have got some treatment and then been sent back to Hightower or wherever it's called. So in the long run, Grace and Henry wouldn't have gained anything to make their scheme worthwhile. And there's a similar lack of logic to the plot of the scheme rather of the maid and the butler in the second half of the film, because again, they couldn't have known that Grace was going to kill Henry's. It's a similar deal. At best, they could have maybe driven a wedge between Grace and Henry, but I think in the story they were hoping that there would be a murder, because when Grace announces that Henry's dead, the maid and the butler don't react surprised at all. It's as if this was their plan all along, but how could they have predicted that? They couldn't have done. So this film really does suffer from a number of really illogical things, even if I did sort of enjoy the first half of the film. Another problem with this story is the fact that Janet doesn't come back into it at the end. She literally leaves the film halfway through and never returns. That is a massive negative for me, because Janet's character is the beating heart of this film. We've got to see her come back at the end and realise that she wasn't going stir crazy all along. Better still, it would have been nice to see her go back to the boarding school, and then we could have had the story go full circle. We could have seen her briefly get integrated back into her friendship circles, ready to move on with the rest of her life. It's a common frustration with me in these older films that they often didn't seem to know how to finish a story properly. They didn't understand the value of a good epilogue, and we have a clear example of that right here. I'll tell you what though, the actress who plays Janet, it occurred to me during this film that she did not look 17, and I was proved right because I went on Wiki afterwards, and yeah, Jennie Linden, who played Janet, she was 25 when this film came out, but it doesn't matter. She's a pretty good actress, actually. Another reason why I'm sad that she leaves the movie halfway through, the way that she does her screams and carrying on, it's really well acted, and that was important for this film because the very first scene required the actress to be really good at that, to make that first scene, that nightmare, really horrific and draw you into the story. The little girl who plays young Janet in the flashback scene, she does just about the best screams I've ever heard. So both versions of Janet in this, very well acted. This film certainly brings the horror, even if it does suffer from a lack of logic. We get that opening scene, which is great, and then there are quite a few really disturbing murder scenes. The one in the flashback, that's quite horrific to look at, just having this crazed woman stood over this dead body, her husband, and there's no real reason as to why she's murdered this guy. Then a bit later on, we get to watch the murder of Henry's wife, and that kill's not so good. I found that scene frustrating, that Janet would kind of give in to her impulses like that and get herself sent out of the story, especially looking back on that scene now. Then the final kill of the movie sees Grace kill Henry. This would have been a really effective kill had Henry's character been more likeable. You know, the sight of a stabbing, crazed woman like Grace just going at it. But as it is, I'm just kind of sat there shaking my head thinking, can you two just stop destroying each other, because you're both really, really irritating me. So I'll quickly show you the version of the film I've got in a little bit more detail. Here it is. It was done by Final Cut Entertainment. It's not the cleanest presentation I've ever seen on a Blu-ray. There are quite a few scratches and blemishes on this, as I sort of hinted at earlier, but they're not too intrusive. Most of them are in the first 10-15 minutes, unless I just got used to them after a while. I'm probably sort of going into this a little bit too much. The film is still very watchable in this condition. I've just seen far, far better. In terms of features, there are a couple of documentaries. One's called Nightmare in the Making. Another one is called Madhouse, Inside Hammer's Nightmare. And there's also something called Jennie Linden, Memories. So obviously that'll be about the actress that plays Janet. There's also a stills gallery. No audio commentary, but there's still a fair bit to get your teeth into. The tagline on the back of this says, "She dreamed a dream of murder that didn't end when she woke up." I've got to take issue, though, with the description of the plot on the back of the box, because it says that Janet was expelled from her school and sent home. I don't think that was the case in the film. It felt to me like it was kind of a mutual decision between her and her teacher, but minor detail, I guess. So there it is, Nightmare. I'm not sure if I'm going to watch this again. I mean, I'll keep it on the shelf, certainly, but at the back of my mind, whenever I do consider whether to watch this again in the future, I'll kind of think to myself probably that I'm going to enjoy the first half, but as soon as Grace and Henry come into as soon as we switch to their viewpoint halfway through, I'm going to sort of mentally check out. So I don't know, ask me again in about 10 years, I guess, whether I have watched Nightmare again, because right now I'm not sure what my answer will be to that question in a decade's time, potentially. Anyway, for now, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this film. So we've got 1, 2 bloody axes out of 5. I can't honestly give it more than that. It's not a disaster of a film. It's very watchable for the most part, but it's got heaps of problems as I've gone into. So there we are. I'll be back soon with another Hammer review. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye. And don't have nightmares.